All right. Hate to interrupt that conversation there, but probably ought to get started so I don't stall any longer like last week. All right. Well, what a week we've had. You know, we all voted. A few days later, they started counting the votes, and until last night, and long before. Or long after I wrote this joke, we didn't know any more about the president than we did a week ago. So, all right, a bit of sad news for me. Okay. I lost a pair of pen pals this week. I'll miss skipping out to the mailbox. I'm a really good skipper, by the way. Holding my breath in anxious excitement to see how many letters I got from two lovely ladies. Some days my mailbox would overflow with letters. I should have known, though, that the relationship wouldn't last. I even learned they weren't even writing exclusively to me. It's terrible. As I began to notice my neighbor's mailboxes filling up with mail. The biggest clue should have been when I saw that the letters were addressed to Chris McLean or current resident. That's insulting right there. So to Stephanie Bice and Kendra Horn, if you happen to be listening, I forgive you for not writing me any longer. You know where I live should you need to write me again in 2 to 4 years. As most of you may have noticed, I am back for a second week. Another round of punishment for you more than me, but it's still tough on me. Funny story how I ended up back here, standing in front of you for the second week in a row. After last Sunday's lesson, I was on cloud 9. I knew my preparation was successful. I didn't remember half of what I said, but I also didn't remember passing out from fear or anxiousness. So obviously a win. Let's put that story aside just for a second. Side note, for anyone who missed last week's lesson, I'm talking really to you guys there. So, oh, well, never mind then. Anybody else who missed it? I started us on our conduct subseries of the book of Ephesians and spoke on leading the church without having a title, such as an elder, a deacon, a minister or administration person. I had a 10 bullet point checklist tied to biblical principles. It was the best auditorium class that I have ever done. You missed out on something awesome. There wasn't a dry eye, forehead, or armpit standing at this podium last week. It was, whew. It was like those old antiperspirant commercials. Remember the sure, 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 unsure? It was very unsure, unsure, unsure. So arms were down, trying to hide that. If you try to go back and watch it, it just isn't the same. Everybody knows, it's a well-known fact, that the camera adds 10 pounds and 20 mistakes to every recording. So from these statements, you might think that last week was my first time to ever teach an adult class in the auditorium, and you would be spot on. So, back to my story about how I ended up back here, speaking again today. So many of you approached me afterwards, gave me words of encouragement, and I appreciated every one of them. It really meant a lot. But as I was walking out with my family to the car, my wife informed me that she had also received some compliments for me, and she asked if I would also like to hear some critiques on the lesson. Wow. I was stunned. My ego had been popped, destroyed. What critiques could she possibly have for the best lesson I had ever given in my life in the adult auditorium class? So taking a breath and being as humble as possible. Yes. Gotta find the spot in my notes. Hold on. I calmly told her, give me the compliments and lay it on thick. And I never wanted to hear the obviously wrong critiques that she had for me. So she was nice. That lasted all of 30 seconds, though, until the curiosity killed this cat, and I decided, all right, go ahead and tell them to me. But give it to me gently. She didn't beat around the bush. She said, it was a good class, but as it was supposed to be a Bible class, it would have been better if you'd used some stories from the Bible. I was stunned. Every point I had last week had at least one scripture, some two. How could she be saying this? Maybe I did black out while I was talking. She wanted to explain that there are many examples in the Bible where people led without having a title, and I should have used some of those examples. I quickly shot back. I was on fire. Shot back that I didn't have any more time in the lesson. We went to the bell. Not even Jay had time to ask a question. She admitted that was true. And I don't win arguments often, so I'm going to count that as a big victory. I was right, and I knew I had just won. Then she pointed out that I did mention in my lesson that I had a goal of teaching 2 auditorium classes in 2020. I quickly whined back. That's a good thing to resort to, is whining. I quickly whined back that I clearly stated that was an example goal. She said, "That's not what I heard. Win an argument, lose the war." So I texted Gene, and he graciously allowed me to follow up on last week's lesson with this week's. So Gene, if you're listening, thanks. So this week, we're going to be looking at those leaders in the Bible who didn't wait for a title to lead. I hope to tie that back to the 10 bullet points that I found and utilized from the article Project Management Tips for Non-Project Managers, from the Northeastern University's website. Let's start by refreshing or introducing ourselves to these 10 points along with a little summary of each. So the first one, begin with the end in mind. We've got to focus on that finish line. Again, we're talking to the people who don't have the titles. We're leading without being an official leader. Number 2, understand your goal. What is the vision? What is your vision? What is the strategy? Is your goal SMART? For people who missed that last week, that's an acronym. Since we're talking about management stuff, we have to talk about acronyms. Is your goal specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Is it relevant? And is it time-bound? So, for my example, it was, which I'm going to hopefully check off my bucket list here, I guess. I was going to do 2 auditorium classes, teach 2 auditorium classes at South Yukon Church of Christ in the year 2020. It met every one of those SMART goal qualifications. 3, be considerate. You have a good attitude. Do you have good communication skills? Do you have humility? All of those things. It's easier to catch flies with honey than it is with vinegar. Manage risk. Don't be too busy. Manage your calendar. And make sure you can flex if something else pops up or if things don't go to your plan. Avoid perfectionism. Just like the word perfectionism that I can't say. So avoid perfectionism. Don't have analysis paralysis. Don't get bogged down in all the small details. Remember your goal. Focus on that finish line. Manage your time effectively. You got to have accountability, adaptability, and resilience. Avoid multitasking. That's really just messing up at multiple things at one time. So stay focused on that goal. Use the proper tools, pretty self-explanatory. You could be using the Bible as a great tool for a lot of our Christian stuff. You also have other people's experiences. Another great tool. Get familiar with project management methodologies. That would be networking, building a brand. That's defining who you are. And manage up. That's talking to your bosses. You do need to communicate and not just undermine them. And then 10, pursue a degree in project management. Study. Study. Whatever you're trying to do, study for it. And imitate others. You're not the first person to invent the wheel here on a lot of projects. So look at other people and use what their experiences are. So let's, who do we have in the Bible who was a leader before they had a title? Before you answer, I know you guys were just chomping the bit to answer there. That was a rhetorical statement, and I have a few suggestions. We'll go through those here in a second. They are in order, the order that they popped in my head. But do be thinking about the ones that I have missed, as there will be an opportunity at the end to either keep the class going or end your misery early. So let's start with an easy one. A son of a Pharaoh's daughter. We've got Moses. We know his story well, but I'm going to run through the cliff notes. If you'd like, it is found starting in Exodus 2. So he was a Hebrew. He was born to a Hebrew family at a time when Pharaoh was killing. When Pharaoh was killing all the newborn Hebrew boys. His mother floated him down a river and was found by Pharaoh's daughter. He ended up being raised by his mother until he was old enough to go live with Pharaoh's daughter. After he grew up, he killed an Egyptian and got ratted out by fellow Hebrews. And then Moses ran away. So we went from maybe having a title, I don't know what kind of title he would have had, maybe prince, to being a nobody. And yet God called Moses to get his people out of Egypt. Again, we're talking about Moses as having no title. So we can run through the 10 examples, through the 10 items that we mentioned last week. So was he focused on the finish line? His finish line was getting the Hebrews out of Egypt. So he was very focused on that. He knew what he was going to do. Did he have a strategy? I'm not sure if he had a strategy, but God sure did. And God, through him, worked that strategy. Did he have a good attitude? Did he have the communication skills? Did he have humility? At first, no. He did not. And him and God got into it, which that's brave or stupid. But he ended up going back and dealing with Pharaoh multiple times. Was he too busy? Hard to say. All we really see is the back and forth between God, Moses, and Pharaoh. So I'm going to say no, just because it makes my lesson go better. Did he have analysis paralysis? At first, yes. This is back whenever him and God were having words. But then he did what God told him to do. Did he have accountability, adaptability, and resilience? He went back to Pharaoh multiple times, each time thinking it was the last, thinking that this miracle will change his mind and let the Hebrews go. It's definitely, he very resilient, and he adapted every time. And there was a new miracle that God allowed him to do. Did he avoid multitasking? We don't really see that, but again, to make my lesson go better, yes, of course he avoided multitasking. Did he use the proper tools? He used Aaron. God allowed him to use Aaron to do a portion of his speaking. And then he'd also used everything God had given him. A staff that turned into a snake. He used soot that turned into boils. He used the ability to turn water into blood. So he used the tools that were given to him. Did he expand his network? Did he build a brand? And did he manage up? He eventually convinced the Hebrew elders. Remember, he's someone who has been cast out, but he has to come back and convince the Hebrew elders that he's in it for their benefit. He also became well known to the Pharaoh. And managing up, I don't know, he talked to God a lot. And again, that's something I've never had that direct communication with God, speaking back as directly as he did with Moses. So, did he study or imitate others? He was able to get directly in to see the Pharaoh of Egypt, probably the most powerful man in the world at the time. He got to see him multiple times. I cannot imagine going to the White House and visiting the president or former president or president-elect, or I don't know what he is. But he did something that I sure couldn't do. So he imitated somehow through maybe his past knowledge of being in Pharaoh's house. He was able to get in there and communicate. So let's move on. Now that we've gotten one under a belt being Moses, let's move on with one of the more popular people in the Bible who was a leader without a title. Right, I'm speaking of King David. Oh, nope. General David. Still wrong. David, the youngest son of Jesse. There we go. Back before he had a title. Back before he had a known title, anyway. He was asked by his father to take some grain to his brothers while they were camped with Saul. Notes catch up here. Right, they were camped with Saul and the men of Israel, waiting to fight the Philistines. We know most of the story by heart, but to help me make a point, let's read 1 Samuel 17, 8 through 11, and 32 through 37. All right, 8 through 11. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So then, 32 through 37, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been fighting man from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." David ended up killing Goliath with a single rock to the head. Then the Israelites routed the Philistines. At this time, did David have a known title? He was technically anointed to be the next king in chapter 16. He played the lyre for King Saul and was one of his armor bearers, but only a handful of people knew he was anointed. His own brothers treated him as a child and not someone of importance. And after David killed Goliath, Saul didn't appear to have known David and know who David was. In chapter 17, verse 56 through 58, let's read that. The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." So no, he didn't have a title. David did what no other man in the Israelite army was willing to do, and Saul refers to him as a boy and then later as a young man. So, is there an age requirement to lead? Do you have to be retired to lead? I'm not going to walk through it all, but we can run through the 10 points of the same 10 points we just did on Moses' life, on David's life. And despite his various indiscretions, every one of those points is there as he moves his way up to becoming king. Next, let's go back to the death, to just after the death of Moses. And Joshua has now been installed as the leader. He chose to send spies across the Jordan River to Jericho. We're in Joshua 2 now. Those spies ran into someone with a title, but it was the wrong title. Rahab the prostitute. As you might remember, the king of Jericho knew the spies were in Rahab's house, called for them to be brought out and presumably killed. But Rahab took a chance on the spies, hid them, made up an elaborate story as they had already escaped. And then she helped them escape. In return, she saved her entire family from death when the walls of Jericho came down. Rahab is mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. Right, there we go. Rahab is mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus and is listed as one of the people of faith in Hebrew 11. Did she have a title to be proud of when we first met her? I can't imagine so. But without her making the leadership decision for the spies and her family, we wouldn't see her in other places of honor. So let's jump over to the New Testament and talk about a man who had a huge following, but would physically stand out in any group of people, both then and now. Talking about, here we go, John the Baptist. As can be found in Luke 1, he was the son of Zechariah, a priest, and Elizabeth. Though the son of a priest, he lived in the wilderness until he appeared publicly in Israel. John is known for his clothes of camel hair, his leather belt, and a diet of locusts and wild honey. Even looking like the model of crazy, he had a goal of preparing the way for Jesus. And he didn't waver. He stuck to that goal, and he did what was needed for Jesus. Him and his works are mentioned in all the Gospels. Again, we could go through the 10 items that we've talked about and confirm that he checks the boxes on all, or at least nearly all. What about people with bad past? Can they lead for good without a title? What about Saul or Paul? Acts 9 introduces us to this man who participated in the persecution of Christians, even stonings. Remember Stephen, the first known Christian martyr, who also led without a title? Saul went to the high priest and asked for letters of authority to take Christians prisoner and bring them back to Jerusalem. I have to imagine that he had power at some point. He at least had the authority granted to him by the high priest. He was traveling from Jerusalem to Damascus when he was blinded by a bright light and spoken to by Jesus. This began his journey of becoming a Christian, changing his name and writing a notable chunk of the New Testament. So, logic says that such an abrupt change should have taken years to complete, to earn a Christian's trust and to generate followers. Let's read Acts 9, the second part of 19 through 25. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. At once, he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. All those who heard him were astonished and asked, "Isn't he the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who called on his name? And hasn't he come here to take them as prisoners to the chief priest?" Yet Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Christ. After many days had gone by, the Jews conspired to kill him. But Saul learned of their plan. Day and night they kept close watch on the city gates in order to kill him. But his followers took him by night and lowered him in a basket through an opening in the wall. So, Look at the phrase "at once" in 20. It says, "At once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus was the Son of God." He didn't waste any time. Also, by the time we get to verse 25, he has followers. He is leading some of the same Christians he was planning on killing, or taking prisoner, or killing a short time before, and he has no title. So now let's talk about some of the others. Maybe their stories aren't as long, or maybe I just was tired of typing. There you go. The others. Abram, later Abraham. It's Genesis 12. He had no title, and yet he became the father of many nations. Noah, Genesis 6. Didn't have a title, obeyed God, even among the peer pressure of the evil world at that time. Him and his family were the only survivors. Joseph, Genesis 37. He was sold by his brothers into slavery. A slave isn't a good title. Became in charge of one of Pharaoh's officials' houses. Had a run-in with Potiphar's wife. Gets sent to prison. Prisoner, also not a good title. Interpreted some dreams, including Pharaoh's, and he ends up becoming in charge of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. While he had titles, he didn't during very pivotal times in his life. We mentioned Stephen earlier. That's Acts 6 and 7. He was chosen as one of the first of what we might call a deacon, to make sure the widows received their daily distribution of food. He was known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. He went above and beyond his calling for the widows and was stoned to death for testifying the good news about Jesus to the Sanhedrin. Aquila and Priscilla, both in Acts 18 and 1 Corinthians 16. Paul stayed with this couple in Corinth and then traveled with them to Ephesus while on one of his missionary journeys. While in Ephesus, they ran into a man named Apollos, who taught boldly but had an incomplete knowledge of Jesus. Aquila and Priscilla invited him into their home and more fully explained the Word of God, and later encouraged him and help clear a path for him by writing letters to the disciples at his next destination. And then in 1 Corinthians, Aquila and Priscilla are noted as having a church that meets in their house. They didn't have titles. At most, we can tell they were tent makers. But they did what needed to be done. And Gene's little friend type answer, what about Jesus? Yes, the Son of God is an amazing title. But that's not what many people thought of him. Many people who knew his family initially thought of him when they saw him. In Mark 6:3, let me flip over there. Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son, the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. So they didn't think he had a title, that was for sure. I noticed that through the study, I found many of the people who we think of as powerful, as having a title, making a difference, often were known for what they did before that title. King David, killing Goliath. Moses, he was the leader of the Jews for at least 40 years, and he dealt with the Pharaoh. Some were given titles after they did their notable work, and others were not. Paul, I didn't see him having a title. But the title wasn't what enabled them to lead or to do their works to further the kingdom of God. Tying that back into our lives, quite simply, don't wait for a title to lead in God's kingdom. So, right on time here, perfect. I left a few names in the Bible unmentioned in order to try to get people talking. Even if that doesn't work and we have to wrap up class early, you'll be forced to talk to each other until service starts. So, I win either way. In an attempt to extend class, can anyone else think of any other examples of leaders in the Bible who didn't have titles, or any person or persons who might fit into this lesson? Any actions, qualities, or traits that I missed on the people that I did mention? And go. Nothing. Job? Okay. How so? Right? 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 He was able to push back against his peer pressure from his friends. Oh, that's good. Okay, now go. Okay. Not talking to Eric anymore. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, he's right. Yeah. That he filled in the gaps of those little pauses. I get it. I get it. Any other ones? Joshua? Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. You're trying to make the decision. You've got a 2 in 10 chance of making that decision right or wrong. But, and I totally agree. And they probably saw the same stuff. The other spies who said, no way, not possible, they saw the same stuff. And they chose that God was the answer and not. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. All the judges, sure. They were made judges probably. Like, I had the same thought, judges and prophets. Some of those, we read the stories we picked up and they're already judges, or they're already prophets. Others I couldn't tell if they were prophets before they made the prophecies that we saw in the Bible, or if they were right, right. I was thinking like Elijah and Elisha. Were they prophets while we read about them, or were they prophets after? I don't know. Anyway, yes. Any more? What was that Esther? Okay. How so? Yeah, absolutely. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. if we're too limber or too like a willow tree, if we've been too much in the wind, we're going to get moved by the world and not stay focused on the finish line, the goal of what we're trying to be and who we are. They became a leader with a title. Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. That's true. Mm-hmm. That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah, if we look at it as like, well, maybe someday when I become an elder, I'll start teaching that class or I'll start doing that activity, whatever it is. That's the wrong way to look at it, any title or any power, position of power. Anything else? Okay. That's punishment for you making me do this again. Go ahead. Hmm. Yeah, right. Well, it's embarrassing for a church to not have any men in it who are willing to lead. So I can't even imagine that, but you're right. Anything else? All right, well, next week is Gene, so if anybody came here expecting to see him, sorry about that. You'll get to see him next week. Look at that, exciting. All right, you're dismissed.